Hey everybody, welcome to our August edition of CEO Webinars, Energize Your Enterprise with World-Class Meetings. We're gonna let everybody just start to filter in here for a moment. If you look on the right side, you should see a box that says chat. Just drop a hello or where you're from in the chat so we know you can hear us and we know that people are joining. And then a quick expectation on the right side of chat, you'll see Q&A as well. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions, you'll hit that Q&A button, type in your question, and people can vote up the question as well, and we'll use that at the end when we move to the Q&A spot. So I appreciate everyone joining here. We're gonna dive in for the sake of time. If you're looking at the screen right now, if you look in the top right corner of the shared screen, you'll see where it says full screen. So if you want to see the slides bigger, you can click on that. That'll make it bigger. At that point, it will remove the chat view as well. So if you do that, just know you'll have to shrink it back down if you want to ask a question or engage. But we're going to dive in here. So just a quick introduction to everybody. My name is Vince Carone, the Director of Content Development here. We put on these CEO webinars almost every single month as a value to our community to share a skill that you could walk out with some tangible action on for some common problems that we have as entrepreneurs. And so I'm going to share a quick video here to kick off today, which is about having effective meetings. So just let me know if you have any trouble hearing this, but we should be okay. So quick minute clip here.
Think about the last meeting you were in. Was it productive? Was it helpful? Did you want to be there? Did you get a good ROI?
We're going to review each of these cog and sprockets. Each cog and sprocket, like the Chicago flag, has 6 points. So there are 5 6-point plans that we're going to have to review in precise detail before we can make any of these decisions to come together in our corporate synergy.
I bet you could think of a time you've been in that type of meeting. And you maybe even ran a meeting like that. I know I've had meetings go that way. But it starts with being intentional and knowing that you want to get an ROI out of every meeting you schedule or you're a part of.
All right, so that's just a quick clip here from our Dynamic Leadership series where we have a whole course built around effective meetings. And that's essentially what we're here for today, is looking at that going, have I ran a meeting like that? Have I been a part of a meeting like that? I know I've been on both sides of that myself. And we're going to talk through some tips today so we can start to see these negative numbers over the individual's head start to turn to positive. How do we get a positive ROI out of every meeting when we're bringing people together and we have a value on the individuals in that meeting? So that is our purpose today, is really to discuss how to make meetings more effective and ensure you get an ROI in your time spent. And walking out of here today is very, very simple outcomes. How do you have one tip on how to plan a meeting and one tip on how to run a meeting coming out of this? If you walk out here with nothing else but one of each of those tips, you are already on a path to having better energized meetings. And so the value you'll get today is we're going to make sure you have some meeting prep tools. We're going to make sure you learn how to take control of a meeting out of the gate and also provide some ideas on how to infuse energy into these meetings. So in the chat here, I'm going to drop a quick link to a document. If you want to download this worksheet at some point, you can start to reflect on this, and we'll use this throughout the webinar here, and we'll connect it back at the end. So if you click that link, it'll automatically download a PDF for you. And so here's our agenda today, intro to effective meetings. We just hit it. I'm going to bring on our speaker here. He's going to talk about how to plan a meeting, how to run a high impact meeting, and how to increase your engagement in the meetings. Afterwards, we'll save some time for Q&A, and we'll give you a split up into roundtables in the lounge if you can stick around and you want to discuss some of this or even just network with each other. So with that being said, Colin, why don't you join me here on the stage? Colin Bowman is an operations driver, a scaling strategist, a business advisor, and an entrepreneur. He also happens to be one of the most effective individuals at running these high impact meetings with an ROI. So I wanted to bring him on as our skill expert today. Colin, I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to you, let you share your screen. And when you do, I am out of here and the floor is all yours.
All right, give me 1 second here.
Not a problem. And everybody, again, if you just joined us, look to the right of the chat box. You'll see where it says Q&A. If you just type your questions in there as Colin's talking, we'll make sure that we get them addressed as we're coming out of this. So Colin, you can hit present, and the floor is yours.
Cool. You can see the slides, and we're good there.
We are good.
All right, I'm just gonna get right into the content. Quick background is I come from the franchise world. So I ran a trades painting franchise, both owned the franchise and then ran as a franchisor a large division of Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, Montana, Washington, and Wyoming. And went from about 25 employees to the individual franchise to then running a division of about 350 employees. So I bring that up because I think the number one skill that helped me lead through more layers and really scale was running high impact meetings. And I feel really strongly that that's a skill that if somebody wants to scale and have people below them that can also lead through later layers, it's a critical skill to master. And now what I do is I work with a bunch of different businesses in a bunch of different industries, anywhere from construction. But I also work with a guy who takes pictures of the moon through a satellite, right? So I've seen how a bunch of different owners run their meetings, and I'm trying to give you some things that I feel separate the ones that are really high performing organizations and give you some really tactical things. So if you're like me and you want to know like the exact strategy or the exact words to use, I try to kind of structure the content around that. So anyone who works with me is probably sick of hearing me say this. On when it comes to planning, I always just say when it comes to planning your meetings, just show me the prep that you did, and I can pretty much tell you how this is going to go. So let's get into how to plan at a high level. So the first one is I really wish Google had a function, or Outlook, or whatever platform you use for your calendar management. I really wish they had a function where you can actually put the cost of the meeting in the calendar invite. You can put the time, and you can put the date and all that. But you actually, as a leader, it doesn't have this function yet. Lobbying for that, but for now, you can just average the salary of everybody in the room to an hourly rate and put the cost of that meeting in the calendar invite. And I found that people really look at it differently if you do that. And if you have kind of the awareness how much this is going to cost, they take it a bit more seriously and they come ready to get more stuff done. The other thing that I'd recommend you do for every meeting is send the outcome and the agenda of the meeting in advance. Again, there's a different level of seriousness that people bring to a meeting when they know exactly what's going to be covered. They play along a little bit more with the content. And if they look at the agenda in advance and say, hey, can we also throw this in there? It's a very proactive culture that you're going to create. And I think that when it comes to meetings, the more that you can systemize your prep and your participants' prep, the better they're going to go. So if you were to look at my office right now on my wall, I've got a few one-pagers that are the system that I do for my meetings every single week, whether that's a one-on-one, a group meeting, or situationally some coaching meetings that I'll do. I do pretty much the same prep for every different kind of meeting, and I highly recommend getting that in a place where you can see it every day. And usually there's something about the data. There's something that you want to look at from a preparation standpoint. If I'm leading a sales rep, I might want to look at their stats in the previous month. I might want to look at their customer reviews. If I'm leading a operations manager, I might want to look at their retention rate of their clients. I might want to look at their productivity of their staff. Like, I'm gonna look at some data. I'm gonna look at the outlines. When I say setup, I really mean like, how are you designing the meeting? And again, I'm the most uncreative meeting designer ever. I run pretty much the same kind of meetings every week, which creates a lot of ease for me and the participants. And then also the feeling. And this is one that I think is kind of undercoached, is like, what's the meeting gotta feel like versus just the mechanics of it? Like, what's the emotion that you want to evoke in the people or person that you're running the meeting with? And same thing with the participants' prep. Like, I really make sure that their prep is also systemized. So they should be able to send you outcomes prior to the meeting. They should do some reflection. They might have some deliverables ready to rock prior to the meeting. So those are just some high-level things, and I'll show you some concrete examples here in a moment of what that might look like. Going into planning a meeting, I see this a lot when I work with entrepreneurs that are going from stage to stage in entrepreneurship, scaling really fast. They move a lot of meetings, and I strongly disagree with that approach. I really recommend that you never move your meetings unless it's a true emergency. Because if you do that, if you have a schedule where meetings are they're not set, they're like very optional almost in terms of when they happen, that creates a very reactive kind of culture. And I would move heaven and earth to not move your meetings once you get them in place as an entrepreneur and have that clear, consistent structure week over week with your team. And we're going to talk about preparation. Some of you might be listening to this and be like, that sounds good, but how do I get them to start doing high level prep? And I'm going to get into just doing the first round of prep with your participants and what that might look like. So let me show you a couple examples here. Again, this might be too small to see. And so the point of this is not for you to read every word. The point of this is just to show you the basic outline. There's also a little full screen button, there's kind of a box with 4 little arrows that separate outward. So if you want to click that and blow it up a little bit, this is what I have on my wall. So this is just my 1-pager that when I'm doing my prep, I do my prep the same time every single week. This is for what we call a WAM, a weekly accountability meeting. And this is just a one-on-one meeting that I have with people on my team. But I look at the same data every week. I look at how's our cash flow doing? How's our profit doing? Do we have any new applicants to look at? Is there any production challenges that we have, et cetera, et cetera? And then I'll go into the individual strategic prep, right? So I have pretty much the same structure every week for the meetings that I run, but within that structure, I'll change things. Like I'll look at, hey, is there any sort of individual prep that I need to do for those direct reports that I have? And then I also make sure that they're doing their prep. So just like I try to hold myself to a standard of doing good prep each week, I also look at their prep that they're supposed to do for the meeting and make sure that they're doing it right. Like, is their schedule filled out? Is there, is there thoughtful reflection coming into the meeting? And some of my direct reports might be watching this and chuckling a little bit, because they know that if there's ever a time where I feel like it could be done better, I'll just shoot them a quick message and say, hey, we're going to have a way better meeting if we get more thought on this and this. So please just have that ready and look forward to having a good meeting. Like something like that is just a weekly thing. And then I'll get my outline together. I'll have any specific administrative things that I might want to cover with them administratively or with them in their world. So that's just one example. Again, you don't have to use this as an exact template. This is just something that might get the wheels turning a little bit. And then this is the participants prep, right? This is where they would then, for this weekly accountability meeting, which is just a one-on-one meeting where I'm helping them hit their goals, in their role, they would submit something like this to me. This comes from the franchise world. So anyone who's on the call who used to work with me in that space, they probably recognize this document. Or every week by Friday evening, they would submit this document to me in preparation for a one-on-one meeting the following week. And I want to slow down on this, because I hear a lot of owners say things like, yeah, I don't need to have one-on-one meetings. They can just call me whenever they need something. And that is a really good way to create a life of chaos and not have fun as an entrepreneur. So I think that what really held me back when I was scaling originally, the hardest part for me in the franchise world was going from 25 to 50 employees. Why was that? Because I didn't run good meetings, and I didn't have people come into the meetings prepared the way that I should have. And as a result, I didn't have like independent problem solvers. I had kind of instruments of me that just needed direction all the time. And that was my fault, because I didn't create a situation where they had to think like entrepreneurs. So again, this will help you create employees that kind of think like business owners, which is really the dream. So if you want some quick advice on this, I would recommend that for any one-on-one meeting that you have with your staff, they should have some sort of preparation due at the same time each week. And what I like to have them do is look at some qualitative things. So qualitative would be like, how are they feeling about the business that's going well? Like, what do they feel good about? What do they not feel good about? Like, where are they feeling held back? And then I usually have a part up here, if you can see kind of the right part of the screen, where they get some things they want to talk to me about. So, hey, I want some help with this customer, or I really could use some more development on managing this part of the financials, or hey, when is the next round of expenses due? Right? Like there's a combination of administrative and development questions. And then I always have them review stats. So usually these meetings are centered around, how did we do on our goals last week? What are our goals this upcoming week? So I want to have all that stuff reviewed and prep coming in. And if you just think about someone going through this, if you make them do this each week, they're going to be kind of coaching themselves ongoing. It's just the act of filling in your goals versus your actuals gives you a lot of insight yourself and starts making you think like an entrepreneur. So just like you have a business plan as an entrepreneur, they should have one as an employee. And then it turns into a culture of, hey, here's the plan that I made. Can you give me feedback on my plan? Instead of, hey, Jason, can you make my plan for me this week? So you can see how different that would be from an organizational standpoint. This is another preparation piece. A lot of my clients are doing leadership conferences right now. So they're getting their team together the start of Q3 to prep for Q4 in 2022, actually. And again, the point of this is not to read every word of this email. The point of this is just to show you a few things that are, that this is a real email that we sent to the leadership team of a client of mine to get them ready for it. So we put the purpose, outcome, and agenda in a link there in the email so that everyone could see it in advance. We had a prep worksheet that I'll show you here in a second that has everyone filling out some reflective questions and some outcomes for the meeting. And then we had a little skill thing that we're going to be doing. So we had kind of a attachment that speaks to that exercise we're going to do. So again, this isn't complicated, but this just made us have such a better meeting. And I bet you if you were to ask people that went to this, they felt that they got a lot out of it. Now, again, you might look at this next screen and be like, man, that's a lot of data. Don't worry about it. If it's too small to see, you'll get copies of the slides. But I'll just read you some of the questions. This is just a shared Google Doc. And I'm a big fan of shared Google Docs because then everyone who's going to this leadership meeting that this company is holding can see what everybody else wrote, and they can see kind of the level of prep that's expected, which again creates really good performance culture in an organization. So, some of the questions are, hey, what are you most excited about in regards to the future of the company? What drains your energy in your current role? What is working well? What's not working well? What questions would you want to bring to the group? So again, this is all due in advance of the conference. Everybody can read everybody else's thoughts, and they're going to have a way better meeting versus what I see unfortunately happen in a lot of meetings where everyone gets in a room and then they're like, yeah, so what do you got for me? Again, I highly encourage you to hold your people to a high level of prep. And if you ever get pushback, like I know that when I first started implementing these standards on prep, I got a little bit of pushback in the franchise world. And a question that helped me break through that a little bit was, who do you think this is for? So if I ever had an employee that was like, man, this is a lot, like, can I just show up to the meeting? Like, I'll just tell you what I think when I show up. I would then respond with, hey, who do you think this kind of preparation is for? Oh, it's for you because you want me to do it. No, this is for you. We're gonna have a way better meeting if you write these topics in advance, because I'm then gonna read them a day or so in advance of the meeting, and I'll come ready with a much more thoughtful, resource-based approach than if you just think through ongoing. And it'll also make you proactive. It'll make you think through the problems before they become problems. And then we're always solving next week's goal this week versus constantly reacting. So I just don't accept weak prep. Your people can do it. And if you're challenged by like, how do I get them to do good prep? I recommend you run the first round with them. And so that could be like a Friday evening where everyone just orders pizza and you guys do your preparation for the next week's meeting, the first round of implementing this, just so they get the muscle memory built and you can set the standard there all together on what good prep looks like. That's what I had on that. You might have some questions. We'll have some space at the end, but that's what I had for you on how to prepare to run a meeting. Now let's get into running the meeting, right? So again, I'm going to give you some structures that I personally really like for some common meetings. So one-on-ones are really common meetings in pretty much any business. Team meetings are pretty common in pretty much any industry. And then I'm going to give you some situational ones like a career development meeting, as well as a leadership conference meeting. So that's what we'll hit on. So here's the outline that I like for one-on-ones. And again, as you're listening to this, don't feel the need to follow it exactly. Just maybe see if you can grab some of this stuff and apply it to your world. So this is the flow that I like. It's like a meaningful check-in. So hey, how's life outside of the business? What personal anecdotes can you follow up about that person? Every properly done meeting, one-on-ones that is, starts with rapport. If you just get right to business, and I'm kind of a down to business guy, so this is a weak spot of mine for sure. So I actually prepare for the rapport so that it sounds a little more natural and that it sounds it's just better rapport, right? I always want to start with a check-in. Then I'll go to outcomes. Hey, like, what do you want to get out of the time today? Making sure that they're coming with outcomes to me. Because again, if somebody comes to me and they're like, no outcomes. I question that because I'm like, man, really, I can think of 100 things to talk about right now. Like, and again, and that shouldn't be an issue if you already did your prep. Housekeeping. So I'll then go into, hey, what quick admin stuff we want to get out of the way. I like to get my admin covered before I get into the real meat of the meeting, because I want them ending the meeting very focused. I don't want to end the meeting with like, oh, and by the way, you got to book your flight here, or oh, by the way, you got to submit this email to this person, because that kind of scatters their thoughts. I want to get all that quick stuff done initially in the meeting so that I can get into the meat quickly. And then I'll do a goal review. Hey, how did you do on your goals since we last spoke? I'll try to pull some learning out. Like, what did you learn from that you can apply to the next set of goals that you have? And then we'll get this upcoming stretch's goals. So usually I do these weekly. Sometimes people do these meetings bi-weekly or even monthly. I had an admin assistant where I would do these monthly versus weekly, because their cycle was a little bit different than like a sales team leader, for example. But I would then get their upcoming set of goals set. I would then make sure that we had plenty of time to discuss their stuff. So just saying, hey, I saw you had a couple of things in here about this customer. What's going on there? How can I help you? Right. And then I would hit my discussion topics. If they didn't have anything that aligned with what I had, I would then bring it up and say, hey, I also wanted to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. We'd cover that. And then we'd summarize the meeting with, all right, so we got our goals, we got our path to go hit there. And what's the things that are going to be the most important items to execute between now and then to hit these goals? Right. And that's typically how I'd end it. Last thing I might say is, and what stood out from the meeting today? Like what stood out from this meeting? So anyone who's been a part of these, whether it's within Cultivate or outside of it, I wouldn't mind you just going into the chat and you can say, hey, this is total BS. Or you can say, yeah, I've actually seen a lot of value in doing this and having like this kind of structure. I'm not trying to steer you either way. I'd love to hear responses on that. But the outcomes that I'd have for these meetings, I'm just going to give you a couple other things on this, would be they have some key learning drawn. So the person that is reporting to you has some key learning drawn from the previous goal period to the upcoming one. And they get all their questions answered. They feel like you really, took the time to answer their questions. They have a clear path. And when I say path, I really mean a calendar. Like I want a big outcome for me for these meetings is that they have a calendar and a schedule to go hit their goals, not just a big to-do list. And the biggest mistake that I see people make with doing these kinds of meetings is, number one, accepting weak prep. So accepting prep that is substandard, letting people fly with mediocre preparation, and trying to cover too much. So my weakness when I was doing this is I would try to solve like every little thing in their world in like a 30-minute to a 60-minute meeting. And it's actually better if you just pick the 1 to 2 things that are the most important things to solve and then let the rest go, which I realize might be hard to do. So that's what I got for you on one-on-ones. Let's get into team meetings. First thing that I would do is a POD. So POD, again, Cultivate it's almost a cliche now because we use this so much, and that's because it's so important. POD stands for purpose, outcome, agenda, decision, right? So that's just a quick acronym where if you do that right up front, it makes it seem like you kind of know what you're doing. People follow along a lot more. It puts you in the driver's seat, and you look like a total pro. So if you get one thing right, just do that. You'll be just fine. So if I was running this meeting today, I'd be like, yeah, purpose of this is to give you some real actionable tools that you can then go implement into your own meetings in your company. The outcome would be that you've got just a couple things that you can then use to improve the effectiveness of your meetings. The agenda will start with how to prepare, then how to run a meeting, and then I'll just give you some random cool things that I think work really well. And I want you to decide what you're going to take action on at the end of this. So end scene. But that'd be like how I tee up a POD for any meeting. And if you just do that up front, that's a big piece of it. I would then get a meaningful check-in. I'll touch on this a little bit later in the session today, but I would do a check-in where if there's a group of usually 5 to 10 to maybe 20 maximum in these kind of meetings, I would do a check-in that is better than just how was your weekend. I think that's boring and lazy. I think you can do a better job than that. So I'll give you a couple examples, but I want you to start thinking like, how could you do a meaningful check-in to get people's heads in the right space, to get them feeling connected to the group right up front. Then I would go into shout outs. Like I think people love shout outs. So what that would look like is the leader of the meeting might say, anyone have any shout outs for anyone else in the team? People would then stand up and say, yeah, I just want to shout out John for really helping me out in this customer problem last week. Like you didn't need to do that. That meant a lot to me. Way to go. And then just keep like the energy gets way up when you start meetings that way. So I really like that approach. A lot of people like state of the state. So that might be just, hey, where are we at snapshot as a company? Typically there's some sort of driver, maybe the owner, maybe it's a operations leader, sales leader, recruiting leader, giving kind of state of where the company is at. Then going into topics. Again, I put a couple down here. I realize it's kind of small, but topics could be anything from, hey, here's the next piece of technology that we're evaluating. Should we go this way or that way on the technology? Topics could be, hey, we really feel like we could be doing a better job with our customer experience. We want to put our heads together and try to figure that out, right? So this is really situational, but the first four are pretty set. I think that flows pretty nicely for most of the meetings that I've seen that go that way. And then at that point, you'll work through your topics. That's usually the bulk of the meeting is step 5. And then you'll go into summarization and then an action plan. So I usually like the team members to do that, not the leader. So the team members would then summarize their takeaways, get an action plan, and then we'll end with a charge, right? When I say that, I mean, you really want to end these meetings as though people want to go run through a brick wall to take action. And we'll talk about how to do that here in a little bit. But again, that's a structure that I like. You may have just as effective of a structure that's a little bit different, but there's that. Here is another thing that I see. This is probably the most underutilized meeting, and which is ironic because I think it's one of the most important ones to do, which is an employee development meeting or an employee review. I also have heard them called career meetings. So a quick story is that I came from a painting franchise. Again, we painted houses, and what's ironic about that is that I'm not into painting. I'm literally good if I never do it ever again. But what I did like is I loved the entrepreneurship part. I loved the people in the company. And what kept me around this company for 10 plus years was so biannually, every 6 months, I had a superior come to me and talk to me about my career in depth. We had a meeting just about the next steps in my career. And that kept me along with this company that I wasn't really into the service, but that meant so much to me. And I find that a lot of employees don't get that. So here's how you might structure this kind of meeting. And again, when you hear when you hear employee review, I don't mean like a performance assessment. That could be part of it, but that shouldn't be the whole thing. This just really should be more about their development. So I would go POD, I would go expectations. So expectations would be something like, hey, it takes as much courage to give feedback as it does to receive it. So I just ask that we're both really open with each other as we go through these, and that we both lay it all on the table for each other, right? I would review their prep, so they should have some sort of preparation coming into this meeting, typically around their career. Hey, where do you want to be in the company a few years from now? What do you feel really good about with our working relationship? What do you not feel good about? Right? Again, make them think more about the people and kind of the longer term in the company. I would then do an in-depth conversation on their career goals. Hey, where do you want to be 6 to 12 to 24 to 36 months down the road? And then have an honest conversation around, hey, here's 2 things that I think will really help you get there. Here's a couple things that will hold you back, and I want to help you problem solve those. Again, not like bringing the hammer down, but having a real conversation around things that are driving them and things that might be holding them back in the next step in their career. I think this is also a really good time to talk about your working relationship with your direct report that you're doing this meeting with. You're saying, hey, like, how could we work better together? Right? Like, that's always a really enlightening conversation. And again, keeps things on course if you ever feel off with somebody. You'll then set some action plans saying, okay, so it sounds like you want to be leading the operations team meetings in the next 6 months. Here's a 90-day action plan that will help build my confidence to let you do that, right? And then you're then supporting them in planning that out. You'll then review meeting and then end with a sincere thank you. Hey, there's nobody I'd rather build this team with. I'm really lucky to be working with you. Thanks for the hard work. Yeah, something like that, okay? And a lot of times when you first do these kinds of meetings, so again, I recommend doing these once or twice a year. A lot of times you'll get people they don't know what to say. They'll be like, yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about my career, which is totally fine, because the fact that you even ask them that makes an impression. And the fact that, like, I bet you if they don't have an answer, they probably haven't had a boss that's done that for them before. And I think it separates you in a really good way. Last one I'll show you is an outline for leadership retreats. So these are not my strong suit from a fun standpoint. I think most people wouldn't look at me and be like, oh, this is the social butterfly of the company. And that's just because that's not my skill set necessarily. But I strongly believe that you should do leadership retreats at least once a year. And what does that mean? That might mean taking your team from the office setting and going to a cool place that is different than what they would normally experience, and working on the business for a little bit, and really more so working on the relationship for the bulk of this time. So I've changed my mind on these as I've gotten a little bit older. I used to be the guy where I would take a team to like Fort Lauderdale, and then we would plan out like 9 straight hours of content. And then at the end of the day, people would be like, why did we go to Fort Lauderdale? We just hung out in this hotel room the whole time, right? And in a conference room in a hotel. And so I've actually changed my mind, where I used to make these be like 90% business, 10% fun. I actually think they should be like 33% work, 66% fun. So that means that if you're taking a team to Breckenridge, Colorado, you might do from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. working on the business, and then 11 a.m. the rest of the day, go do something awesome with the team and build really strong relationships with the team. So this is how I might structure it, right? As starting with a POD. So we kick off the conference with purpose, what we're trying to accomplish, the agenda, what we're going to decide, then some sort of team building check-in. I think there's a lot of things that you can do And if you just Google like team building exercises, you'll find a bunch of great examples of this stuff. But I would start out with something that gets people a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more open to finding out what the other team members are like as a check-in. This is a great time for State of the Union. This is a great time to show people, hey, here's the state of the company right now. And then going into the future of the company. So a lot of time, this is actually a really good time of the year to do these. Between now and like early Q4 is a great time to have a leadership retreat, because then you can look at 2022 and beyond. Hey, are we really all aligned on our vision? Do we know what our vision is? If I asked every employee in the company, could they articulate that vision to me unprompted? And if they can't, do a leadership retreat and make sure everyone's really aligned on that. What are our macro goals next year? What KPIs or what key performance indicators are we going to track to make sure we're working towards that? What are the really important initiatives we're going to do next year? And then how are we going to implement those initiatives in pursuit of that? And then again, the goal of these meetings is not to solve everything at once. It's really to make 2 to 3 important decisions that are going to make the biggest impact 1 year from now. So sometimes I see people do things like getting their core values in writing, a big technology change, a big macro strategy shift, that sort of stuff. And then again, go do something awesome. Like if you're gonna take the time to get the team together, make memorable, fun stuff happen, and don't make it all business. 33% business, 66% relationships. In the chat, I'm open. If you have other ratios that you like better, very open to hearing those. That's just my personal opinion. And this could be a multi-day thing. It doesn't need to be just 1 day. Cool. So a couple things like on pretty much any meeting, how do you keep it on the rails? So the first one is just set great expectations up front. One of the things that I hear a lot in meetings is they're like, yeah, I want them to go well, but people just don't talk in the meeting. So you could say something up front like, all right, so we're now going to get into the content really quick. Everyone, silence is going to be interpreted as disagreement. So you cannot be the kid in the back of the class with their hood on looking at their desk. I need your voice. I need your brain in this meeting. I'm counting on you as a leader to share that. So everyone's got to participate. And if you don't, that's okay. I'll just interpret it as disagreement and ask you what you disagree on. If you say something like that, like you'll get participation, and that's just one example, but set great expectations up front on that. Switch voices often, right? So a lot of times when I'm talking to owners and they're running a meeting with 10 people and they're like, man, the energy in this meeting is really low, it's often because there's not enough voices being heard. There's not enough people who are getting the spotlight put on them to share the floor and talk about stuff. So switch voices often, and that might mean preparing them. And you might say something like, hey, when it comes to the marketing section, you had a big win last week in marketing. I'm going to call on you, so be ready to share some stuff. They like that. They'll want to do that. Assigning a note taker or a timekeeper, right? So this is a really important one. If you're the kind of owner who really gets into the discussion and sometimes doesn't check the time, have somebody whose job it is in the meeting to be the timekeeper and take notes at the meeting as the meeting goes on, so that you can then send them out once it's done. And you'll look like a total pro if after every meeting you have notes of the meeting sent out to everybody who is involved. Redirecting the conversation. This is just something that, again, I might say this up front in the expectations. I might be like, and not to be rude, but for the sake of time, I might cut you off. Again, not to put you down, but just to make sure that we cover all the content and make the best use of time. If you say that up front, if somebody starts going down a rabbit hole, you might just say, okay, quick timeout, valid thoughts. Let's bring it back to the core conversation so we can hit our timeline. All right. This is one that I found is really good for introverts in meetings. Sometimes if you have like a really extroverted, like alpha type of person in the meeting who likes to dominate the conversation, you can use what's called the 2-minute rule, which is whenever somebody wants to invoke this, they can just hold up 2 fingers, and that is a signal to the rest of the group to give them 2 minutes of uninterrupted space to get their thoughts out. That's a really good way to get someone who's maybe an introvert the floor they need to get their thoughts out. And then using the parking lot method. So the parking lot is, what this would look like is having a whiteboard or a piece of paper on a wall in the back of the room. And if somebody has a thought that's not relevant to the current topic, but they want to capture it, they can just go write it on the back of the room, and then that way you can capture it during the meeting. Or if you're doing it virtually, you can just have like a chat box specifically for the parking lot, which is just a, hey, here's a topic that I want to cover. Let's hit it at a break so we don't redirect our content. And then if you're doing virtual meetings, I really like breakout rooms. I really like, here's a piece of content, get in breakout rooms, discuss it, then come back. People love doing that, especially if you mix up the participants in the breakout rooms for those of you that are running lots of remote meetings. Cool. Now I'm going to give you some quick rapid fire stuff. on how to increase engagement. This is the number one question I get is, how do we get engaging meetings that people enjoy going to that are really high impact? So I'm just gonna give you the kind of the shotgun approach here. And again, you'll get these slides. So if this is going kind of quick, don't worry, you'll get the content. So here's some just cool random things that I think actually work in meetings that I've been a part of. And I'll run through this list for you right now. So the first one is just do unorthodox check-ins. Again, I think if your check-in is just, so Bob, how was your weekend? Again, I think it's kind of, I think we can do better than that, right? So and again, anyone who works with me in Cultivate, they know that they might be laughing as they see this, because every check-in that we do in our team meetings is some personal question about the group. So I'll give you a couple examples. One was, hey, how was your weekend? And who was your dream iconic dinner guest? One that we did last week or a couple weeks ago was, what's the worst Halloween costume that you've ever worn? Next one was, if you were to give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be? So we're just going around the room, and people are kind of looking forward to this, and they learn a lot about their team members by doing this, and it's kind of a fun way to start meetings that I think gets engagement going right away. Again, start with shout outs. I said this before, I just want to underline this again. Get time in your meeting for shout outs. In our internal all company meetings, someone correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think our all-time record is like 15 straight minutes of shout outs. And it's one of my favorite parts of all of our team meetings is when our CEO says, cool, any shout outs? And then, people around the company say, hey, I just want to shout out Nicole for a great training event, or I want to shout out Aggie for volunteering for X, Y, and Z. And I just really enjoy listening to that, and it makes me feel very motivated and connected right out of the gate. So start with shout outs. If your team is struggling with this, then go to your leaders in your team and just say, hey, I'm gonna have time for shout outs. Don't be the person who doesn't shout out their team. Like, think of some meaningful things to say. Another thing I put down here is talk less and spotlight your team more. So here's what I mean by this. If I ever want to make a point, if I ever want to do something that I'm trying to push a point of mine that I want to get across to a team, I'll always try to do that through a team member than just saying it myself. Why do I say that? Well, because it always means more coming from a peer than it does from a supervisor. So for example, in the franchise world, I had a big kick on sending thank you cards to clients, and I really struggled. I just kept beating that drum and no one was doing it. And then one day I was like, the best salesperson in the company who always sent thank you cards, I was like, hey, in this next meeting, I'm gonna ask you to share on that. You've had a ton of success. Could you be ready to talk about that when it comes time? And then after that meeting, people were like, man, I think I'm gonna start sending thank you cards. And I'm like, I feel like I've told you that like 40 times. But because it came from a peer, the buy-in was a lot higher. So I really recommend, put the spotlight on your team, especially if you want to share best practices. Don't just share it yourself. Another one is just to use compelling data and visuals. So don't just talk, like have some sort of visual that you're sharing. Could be a slideshow. If you don't want to create a slideshow, which I get, it takes a lot of time, you could put like a scoreboard up. Like, if you have a team that's kind of a competitive team, how are the individuals doing versus their goals? You could have a customer review. You could have a slide up that's like, here's an awesome customer review that brings us back to what we're all here to do. And then compelling data. Like, hey, here's some interesting market research that I want everyone to look at and be ready to discuss for our next phase, right? Like, compelling data gets people interested, and people usually enjoy that. Give tools and resources. So again, coming out of this meeting, one of the things that you may or may not be excited about is you're gonna get a lot of tools. You're gonna get some templates. Vince literally in this meeting is gonna give you a template that you can use. And I found that a lot of times people know they're gonna get something coming into a meeting, their engagement's a lot higher, and people like new things, especially today, with the world moving very fast. They're always asking what's new. So if you give them a resource such as a new piece of technology or an article, it could be a simple article that relates to what we're talking about. That's another piece. This is just something that I've seen that I thought was pretty cool. There's a guy, Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell was Steve Jobs' business coach, Ben Horowitz business coach. This is a guy, Silicon Valley legend. And what he used to do in meetings was whenever he heard something in meetings that he just loved, he would stand up and he would actually clap in the middle of the meeting. And you might be hearing that and be like, wow, that makes me really uncomfortable. So that may not be your style, but it was people loved it, and it was a really cool way to get a lot of energy in the meeting and make the people feel really appreciated in the meeting in kind of a non-corporate way. And then the last thing I'll have for you here is just do unorthodox meeting, or a couple extra things I should say, is do unorthodox meeting wraps. So one of the ways in the franchise world that we used to end our team meetings is we would have somebody assigned to do a quote at the end of each meeting. So we'd finish our content, and then we'd be like, all right, Jillian, you're selected this week for the quote, so what do you got for us? And then Jillian would stand up and she would share a quote that she selected that related to something we were talking about. So she might say something like, this is Abraham Lincoln addressing the, whatever at Gettysburg. I feel like we're going to use that quote because we're in the field of battle and we got to go, we got to go win the next phase. Like, it was kind of funny and people would chuckle, and everyone was always kind of interested in what the quote was going to be and who was going to be picked for it. So that's just one example, but do it like an unorthodox meeting wrap to get some of the energy up coming out of it. This is a technique that Brene Brown uses. Brene Brown's an entrepreneur that I really look up to. I think she runs awesome meetings. And her approach is she uses 5 minutes of silence at the end of each meeting. So what that would look like is if the meeting ends at 10, at 9:55, she would stop the meeting and just say, cool, so everyone 5 minutes, I want you to think about what we covered today. Take a second to let it really digest and sink in, and then make a couple notes in your plan of action. So literally in a boardroom, she's got executives that are just kind of sitting there in silence, and some people write stuff, some people just look out the window. But it's a really good way to kind of like formalize the end of a meeting and give them space to digest it, versus like meeting ends and then a call starts 30 seconds later and it dilutes a lot of what you wanted to cover. Okay, so that's a technique I thought was pretty cool. And then last one I'll show you here is I got a chance to speak to Hap Klopp, which was the founder of North Face, and I asked him, like, how did you guys run your leadership retreats? Because I've heard famous things about cool things about the famous North Face leadership retreats. And the way that he would end every one of his retreats is they would cover like the next year's goals, the company vision, and he would then get up and he'd say, all right, so here's what we covered. He'd list it off, and he'd be like, so that's what we're on a mission to go do. I hope this is so clear that some of you leave the company. Now you might hear that and be like, man, that's not that motivating. But he said it in a way that was like, we don't want you to leave. Like, you guys are awesome. We worked hard to get you here, but the cost of our culture is too high to not have everybody be totally aligned with this stuff. So we want to help you find the best situation. If you're not aligned with this, just talk to me privately. And every year, a couple people actually came to him and said, hey, I'm actually not aligned with this. But the ones that stayed were hyper-focused on the outcomes they wanted to hit. So anyway, that's the list that I had for you. There's a whole bunch more, and this is a really fun topic to discuss. But those are some random things that I've seen impact meetings. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll give it back here to Vince, is make your people better at meetings. This, again, is probably the number one thing that helped me scale to a much larger division, was actively working on the meeting skill for my direct reports, the other leaders in the company. So watching them do meetings, have them send you recordings, coach them, give them feedback. And if you want an organization that's made of leaders, prioritize making them really good at meetings, and duplicate yourself in being able to run these and watch what happens. So that's all I had. Last thing I'll show is just additional reading. If you're a reader or an audiobook person and you want to see some other thoughts on this, this is where a lot of this content came from, and encourage you to check it out if you so see fit. So that is all I had.
Awesome job, Colin. Appreciate it. Look at all the feedback you're getting here. It's great. Some really important takeaways. I hope everybody was able to grab something from one of those sections. I saw a lot of validation in the chat, and for me, it's always that it always comes back to slowing down at the beginning of a meeting, getting everybody comfortable, and you do that through rapport, through checking in, through letting other individuals talk and pulling from them. So that always sticks with me when it comes to meetings, and brings about high impact and trust for both me with my superior and when I'm leading teams. So thank you for that. We have some questions here. If you're open to moving to Q&A,
yeah.
For those in the chat, if you didn't ask something yet, feel free to drop it in the chat or the Q&A itself. I'm going to start with Q&A. I'll come back to chat. So I'm going to just start from the beginning. I'll highlight the question on the screen. Colin, I'll ask you, and then I'll give us a cue when it's time to wrap up here. So keep the questions coming, everybody. Here we go. So Tim asked, do you put the cost of a meeting in client-facing meetings? Which is a great question.
It depends on what it is. If it's like a sales meeting, I probably wouldn't. But if it's right after this call, I have a meeting with an executive team. We got the CEO, CFO, CTO on, and we'll put it in those. So that's a client of mine. We'll put it in those meetings. Yeah.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Here's a question. what do you do for team members who are uncomfortable being put in the spot or thinking on their feet? Meaning like fun icebreakers that must be given a day in advance so they can think of answers. How do you pull from an introvert without putting them on the spot, so to speak?
Yeah, and that was me. Like I'm not really on the spot the guy as much. So what I would do with those people is I would send them the specific things they have to do. So if I'm talking to like an IT guy who needs to give an update, I'll be like, hey, here are the exact questions I'm going to ask, and I'll give them to him 24 hours in advance or her 24 hours in advance. Just be ready to think about it. And if it's like a fun icebreaker, like we had one the other day in our team, which was, if you could listen to one album the rest of your life, which one would you put? And as I was typing that, I'm like, man, that'd be a hard one to think of on the spot. So I just sent that to the team in advance. So yeah, I think it's totally fine to get them ready like that.
Yeah, it's great. And even to add on to that, if you have even if it's not an icebreaker, if you know that you're going to be pulling from the team and you know that you have some people that are introverted, sometimes pulling them in just in advance and say, hey, I'm going to ask you this. How would you answer this? And even just going through that practice round and kind of giving them some tips, like that's great. Or condense it here. If you just hit these 2 points, that'd be amazing. That's what I would love to hear from you. Sometimes some high direction and some practice really works to pull the introverts out and start to bring them a comfort level on the spot as well. Would you agree, Colin?
Definitely. Yep.
All right. Here's a question Ross had. Is there an example of those prep questions you were talking about for employee review or employee development meetings? Do you have a couple examples of those?
Yes. Vince, I can send that. I have a whole prep email that I could send to an employee, but questions would be like, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years in the company? What skills are really important to you to develop? How do you feel our working relationship is going? So all the stuff, like more of those kinds of questions. But yes, I can send you that, no problem.
Okay, we can follow up, Ross. We could follow up with that as part of the bonus content that'll accompany this webinar in the community. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. Chloe had asked, I'd love to share this webinar with the team members if possible to receive a recording. So Chloe, just to make sure, I think I answered this, but to make sure you heard it, we do share this in our community. If we need to talk about getting a team member access, just message me privately afterwards, and we could talk about what that might look like there. We had another question. Will the meeting templates be available to us? Yes. Again, we will have those in the community afterwards. So if you attended this webinar, of course, we will send you a follow-up email and direct you where to go tomorrow to make sure that you have those as well. Let me just check in here. Do we have any other questions? I think that's it. We'll give it another moment here. If you have any other questions, type it and I can pull Colin back. But otherwise, Colin, I really appreciate all the hard work and prep you put into this to make sure that we got an ROI out of our time on this meeting as well. So thanks for leading by example.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen, everyone. We're gonna move over to the roundtables here in a minute, but just some follow-up housekeeping items here as we wrap this up. Let my screen kick in here. So you see, we've got this meeting planning worksheet. I'm going to drop it back in the chat again in case you missed it up front. If you click that link that I just put in there, this will automatically download for you, and it's fillable. So you can just keep making copies of this going forward. It just covers a lot of what Colin talked about: naming your meeting, stating the purpose and outcomes, who's involved in the meeting, what type of meeting are you having, knowing that up front so you know how to guide the meeting, the types of decisions you need coming out of the meeting, whether it's one way, whether it's a group decision or unanimous, any prep that needs to be hit, and then just kind of the emotional tone and agenda that comes through. This is just a good starting kit. If you go, hey, I really want to take the next step on getting an ROI out of my meetings, this is just a great tool that a lot of our team uses and that we were trained on up front until you get into your own groove and kind of know how you want to build your meetings going forward. And then, so I just want to get some quick takeaways here. It's always great to hear from the team. You heard Colin share that when other individuals share what they got out of it, what their value is, there's more buy-in. So just drop in the chat, what are 1 or 2 things that you grabbed from this today that are sticking with you that you want to go implement immediately, or you want to make sure you don't forget? So let's hit the chat with that real quick here. I often find when we put it in writing, it creates more of an accountability to us. So what's sticking with you from today? POAD, silence is disagreement. Yeah, Carrie, setting that expectation up front. I'm going to interpret that as that. Yep. Carl, yes, these slides will be available. Yes. Jeff said the send purpose, outcome, and agenda in advance. Ross, shout outs and team involvement. Yeah, really highlighting the team and getting them involved, make them feel great. Plan and prep properly, increasing the engagement level. talking less and delegating more. Yeah, it's great to be able to pull from others, having a clear understanding of the meeting types. Yeah, Aggie, 33% work, 66% fun for those retreats. Great. So I'm seeing a lot of the similar themes here. Where I know that Colin leaned into these topics in a variety of different ways to make sure that they stuck with us here. So yeah, carry the expectation setting. I might have to cut you off, and that's okay. It just means I'm keeping us on track. People will start to respect you and your meeting times more when you keep on track and come to the decisions you came to that meeting for. People actually start looking forward to the meetings versus going, oh, here we have another meeting. So it's great to set those expectations. So as we hit the client corner here, just a couple real quick items. Reminder, you have 10 free AccuMax indexes a year that you get to send out for leadership or recruiting efforts. Utilize those, and if you want to make that a part of your leadership and recruiting strategies in the future, talk to us about what it means to upgrade and what tools you get from that. If you want to watch this again, Will showed you in the chat. He dropped a link. Well, if you want to drop it again here, where you can go find all of our webinars again. These will be available on replay for you. It'll be up there tomorrow. So you'll be able to go watch this again, slow it down, highlight the points you want. And we always put some bonus content into the course that we talk about through the webinar here today. So make sure you check this out tomorrow as well, because it becomes a whole course versus just a webinar for you. If you're getting ahead of your calendar here, September 16th, we're doing our next webinar. It's on business planning. It will be led by our CEO, Casey Clark, and it'll really start to help us focus on how we can start to plan in advance for 2022. And then, as always, we're always looking for you, those of you that have been involved and really enjoy what we do and understand our culture. Do you know somebody that would be a great business advisor? If you know somebody that would be a perfect fit for us, we would love for you to be able to help us out, send them our way. If you help us find a new team, remember, you get a referral gift from us as well. And now I want to move into roundtables. If you have the time here slotted out, there's over 80 people on the webinar right now. We'd like to exit the stage and move to the lounge, where you can either do one-on-one networking, or you can join a roundtable. And in that roundtable, you can just talk business. You can talk about, you can network, or if you want a specific designation here, go get feedback on meetings you're running. If you want to carry this topic into the roundtable, get some feedback on the meetings you're running, and start to pull from other like-minded individuals on, hey, what can I do to increase engagement? How would you run this? What cadence would you run these meetings at? And start to just pull from others and utilize the community here. So you can see, if you just click, when I end the session here, you'll be thrown back into the lounge, and you can see how to join a roundtable here on the stage. So that's it. We will keep the networking open for the next hour or so, and we appreciate it, and we will see everybody again on September 16th. One more quick thumbs up, a round of applause for Colin Bowman for all his prep here. Thanks, Colin. We appreciate it. All right, everyone. We'll see you next month.